Hello everyone. Hello everyone. The issue that we are addressing in today's meeting is how to make notes for CAT prep. I'm fairly certain most of us are enrolled in some institution somewhere and we are doing lots of work. We are well on our way to preparing for CAT. Hopefully most of us have done more than half the syllabus by now, because in an ideal world, by the time June ends, we should be in a position to be taking lots of tests and mocks. Yet, for some of us who are, let's say, at the beginning phase of our preparation journey, this session would be most useful for you. There are two parts to making notes in CAT prep. The first part is when you're going through the theory lectures, when you're going through the initial learning phase. And the second part of note making is when you start taking tests, because anyone who's repeating CAT or anyone who has had some experience with prep, you would know there is something that you learn in class, and there is a lot more that you learn during test taking and mock taking and everything. So there are two parts to note making. Both those parts will be addressed today, or at least I will try to address them to the best of my ability, how I recommend it and how I did it back in my day as a candidate. Apart from that, those are my intentions of what I want to get covered. But as is the case with any meeting that I hold, if you have any specific questions with regards to note making, with regards to what, as in the expectations that you had of what you wanted answered in this session, now is the time to inform, so that I will record it, and later on, if it gets addressed in the presentation that I have, great. If it doesn't get addressed, I'll answer it separately. Any specific expectation that you have, what will get answered today or what will get covered today? So one of the biggest qualities of smart people in this world is that they never shy away from asking questions. Ask questions. Asking questions is never a problem. Withholding questions is a problem. If you are here, most likely you have something that you want answered. Please ask away. No? Okay. I'll start with whatever I have in mind. First thing, the importance of making notes. Then the three sections: VARC note making, DILR note making, QA note making. Then there is something called repository building. What is a repository? I'll address later. And notes along with class or later. This is usually a question that people have, as in when you're attending classes, should you be taking notes along with it or should you be taking notes after the class? Because during the class, because this is not a entirely theoretical or let's say memory based exam, there is a lot of interpretation involved. In class, if you try to take notes and you try to understand simultaneously, it sometimes gets overwhelming. So what should be the path forward? I'll get there. Now, based on whatever I tell you within these sections, at the end again, I like to dedicate some time to the Q&A, so that if you have any specific questions with regards to whatever has been discussed today, you can ask. Okay. The simplest factor that makes making notes very important is the ability to retrieve information at short notice. Basically, if you don't have notes, if everything is scattered in your head, then what would tend to happen is you will start forming associations, you start forming linkages between two seemingly unrelated things that should not be linked at all. Very often you would have seen when people are solving questions, they learnt A for something in quant. Now, in some other question where A is not applicable, because the condition required for fulfillment of A was not really getting fulfilled in the question given, but because we have not put it in a nice framework, it becomes problematic. The simplest example of this that I can see is, let's say if I told you x plus y plus z, three variables, add up to a total of 15. X plus y plus z add up to a total of 15. What is the maximum possible value of x, y, z? What is the maximum possible value? Maximum possible value of product of x, y, and z. What would that answer be, people? If x plus y plus z is equal to 15, what is the maximum possible value of this product x, y, z? What would the maximum possible product of this expression be? X into y into z. 125, I get one response, 125. Any other response? It can be infinite, absolutely. And see the distinction here. See, somebody has used AM is greater than equal to GM here in order to reach 125, and somebody has been very, very cautious in identifying. There was no instruction given about X, Y, Z. We have no information whether X and Y and Z are positive real numbers. Positive real numbers ensures that AM is greater than equal to GM. That formula based working that operates can be applied. Given that we have no instruction of that sort present here, I can happily take X as minus 1000, Y as another minus 1000, and Z as 2015. Now a negative number into a negative number into a positive number, the product will be significantly larger than 125. And it's not like I need to stop here. I can take it as minus 10,000, I can take it as minus 10,000, and this is 20,015. And the product can be increased over and over again. Now, in order to avoid such things, what is useful is, let's make notes, and let's make notes in English to the extent possible. What I mean by that is, see, CAT for these three celebrated sections, VARC and DILR and Quant, far too many people think DILR is a mixture of Quant and English, and Quant is all about mathematical ability. I'm fairly certain most of us present in class are comfortable and familiar with the four arithmetic operations: subtraction and addition and multiplication and division. We are comfortable with those four operations. Our maths is not compromised. Usually what is compromised is our ability to understand the question. Even for CAT 2023, when people make the claim that the paper was very difficult, it wasn't that you had to do new sorts of mathematical processing. It was more about identifying that questions had levels. You had to do the question in three different levels. For most questions, there were three different levels. You solved the first part, got the input for the second part. You solved the second part, you got the input for the third part, and now the output for the third part was the answer. That is why the question was termed difficult. Now, multiplication and division and subtraction and addition, we know. But how to move from part 1 to part 2 to part 3, that was the challenge. So, making notes or structuring whatever you have learned in a reasonable fashion enables you to have very clear, let's say, blocks in your head. Okay, this way the idea will move forward. The organization. Additionally, see, the notes that I make for myself and the notes that, let's say, somebody else makes for themselves, they will not be identical. Because what is insightful for me may be something very natural for the other person. And what is something very, very insightful for the other person may be very natural for me. See, in DILR, we have this wonderful idea. Whenever you have to make cases, you should start off by looking at extreme situations. What I mean by extreme situations is, let's say, if I tell you X, Y, Z are three variables, and sum of these three is 13, and difference between the largest and the smallest is 5. Sum of these three is 13, and the difference between the largest among them and the smallest among them is 5. Now, and compared to something like another set of such numbers, let's say A, B, C, the sum of them is 18, and the difference between the largest and the smallest among them is 4. The difference between the largest and the smallest among them is 4. Now here, see, if I want a difference of 5, I will start off by, people, please do not write on the screen right now. Wait a minute. Disable annotation for others. And annotate. Clear all drawings. Okay. Let's see if I'm looking for what I mean by extreme situations or extreme cases. If I have a difference of 5, the first extreme that I can see is if I have 1 and 6, then 166 can be a pair that gets made here. Can I have another case made here? 2 and 7 if I have. If I have 2 and 7, difference being 5, then the middle number can be 4. Can I have another case created? 3 and 8. 3 and 8 is 11, 2. And I know this is the limit. I cannot make any more cases after this because my smallest, largest, the extreme cases, I already started checking from the smallest one. Whatever acceptable ones I got would work. Because I had not specified that XYZ are distinct, I can have 166 acceptable as well. Or let's say if I was doing 18 here, Now, 1 and 5, largest and the smallest are 1 and 5. The middle number cannot possibly be somewhere in between. So this is an unacceptable case. How about 2 and 6? 2 and 6 give me 8, middle number would be 10. Not great. 3 and 7, middle number would be 8. Not great. 4 and 8. 4 and 8 is 12. Middle number would be 6. Works. How about 5 and 9? Middle number would be 4. No. But this works. This is the only case that would work. This is the only case that would work for sum being 13 and difference being 4. So in whatever situations you are looking for case building, start by checking for extreme situations. That enables you to get to the right cases effectively. This is for DILR. Now in your notes, what you should be writing, you will solve this set, you will do whatever work that you have to do here, you will get through it in entirety. But post that, you should be writing this learning. Checking extreme situations first enables us to get to the exhaustive number of cases effectively. So that sort of learning or that sort of takeaway from solving questions will only happen if you make notes. If you don't make notes, you keep it all up in your head, you would need to be an ultra level genius to have all these learnings that you've done. Additionally, you can consolidate the memory reinforcement. Very often we want to go back and revise and look at everything in a brief period of time. If at that time you go back and let's say go through the entire video again, it is very time consuming, which is not ideal. The first go-to move should be going back to your notes, which you have prepared appropriately. Okay. Then there is clarity, exam strategy, interconnectivity. Hopefully you understand in the grand scheme of things, what note making enables you to do is get a better grasp of the material that you are going through and enable you to recall and retrieve the information at short notice when you want to apply it at the time of solving. Okay, getting to VARC note making. Between the three sections, VARC, DILR and quant, note making is most useful for quant. It is not that immensely useful in VARC, it is not that immensely useful in DILR, as in it does not have as much utility. It's not that it is absolutely not useful. There is limited usage here, there is small use case here, but in quant, note making is going to be the most important activity, as in out of the three sections, quant has best utility for note making. In VARC also, in the two distinct sections that we have, first is RC and the other is let's say this VA section. For RC, understand, I'm sure you've heard of this advice, summarize paragraphs. And the biggest objection that people have to summarizing paragraphs is, if I write summaries of paragraphs, it takes me a lot of time to attempt RC questions. And that is a perfectly justifiable response until the time you focus on, this is to be done in your initial phase of preparation. When you're preparing for RCs for the first time, when you're solving RCs in the initial, let's say your initial 100 to 120 RCs, you're expected to write summaries. Because what this does is, it reinforces the habit of making small little sentences that give you a reference of what is present in the passage. Once you've done this exercise, let's say 100 times, this will occur naturally, and later on when you're reading RCs. When I am doing RCs now, because I've done RCs several times over the several years, I am not writing down summaries. But while reading, I am creating brief little summaries for my head. Okay, this is what is present in this paragraph, what is the point being made here, and I move on. That's it. Highlight key points. Again, this is for the initial phase of your preparation. You're not expected, you're absolutely not expected to be highlighting key points when you're doing your mocks or your tests, because they come much later in your preparation cycle. In the initial phase, when you're learning, when you're starting off, summarizing paragraphs is an excellent exercise. Highlighting key points is an excellent exercise. Understanding tone, style, any possible biases that the author might have. Very often, authors focus on one issue while completely ignoring the counter argument. If you're able to read through and identify what potential bias the author has, oh, you can make your life so much easier, and your ability to comprehend text, not just for RCs, even outside of the RC world, that will rise immensely. Then, of course, there are going to be words that you come across in RC. There are going to be words that you come across in RC that you would not be familiar with. While you're solving the RC, while you're practicing, try to derive contextual meaning. I hope we know what is contextual meaning derivation for RCs. Try to derive the contextual meaning, but post your solving, after your practice, make that list of words. For that reference, there is a wonderful website by the name of vocabulary.com. I hope all of us have an account. We share in Anesthesia Academy, we share on the public group, we share 2 articles per day with quizzes framed on vocabulary.com. You, as students, can also go to vocabulary.com, create your own student account, and keep on adding words to the list. What vocabulary.com does is it gamifies the entire learning process. Basically, you have points allotted for it. You can go through those same set of words over and over and over again, and then it is not just word meaning, it is usage, it is tense aligning, it is similar phrasal verbs that can be there, all sorts of wonderful things there. So I would highly recommend that you go out, make a free account on vocabulary.com. It is not paid, it is a free account on vocabulary.com. Go there, make your account, and create your own word list of words that you have come across, that you were impressed by, you did not know the meaning of, and regularly go back and keep on creating that list. By the time CAT prep is done, and let's say you've appeared for CAT, even if you've learned, let's say, 400 to 500 new words, or not just words, even phrasal verbs and terms of languages, your journey will not be a waste, because you've learned something significant. Apart from that, again, in the practice phase itself, see, people who are very, very good at RCs are generally people who are avid readers, because they've read so many different forms of text and different areas. They tend to have a clearer understanding of basic terms that get used in different contexts. If you are not one of those people, ideally what you should be doing is, let's say I read a passage on Greek mythology, then I follow it up with a passage on, let's say, cloning, new sort of medical research happening in which ethical dimensions of cloning are being discussed. And the terms used, let's say, utilitarianism or creationism or existentialism. Existentialism is a phrase that everyone would know if you've gone through one cycle of mocks. Existentialism, roughly every year there will be 2-3 passages that uses that term. Now, if you're unfamiliar with these terms, you don't know what they mean, after the practice phase is over, after your solving of the exercise is over, write this down, read up 2, 3, 4 introductory passages, introductory articles that will enable you to get familiar with the base terms at least. Because there are, let's say, for somebody who is not familiar with cricket, and if you tell them there was a short run, it is of course going to be difficult for them, because they have no context of what a run is. Forget a short run, they would have no context of what a run is. Or let's say somebody who is not familiar with football, they would not understand the context of center half and flanks, and even those who follow football very regularly have very rarely have complete understanding of the offside rule. But if you read up on it, the likelihood of you being stumped by it coming in front of you in future is going to go down. Please make sure you should be familiar with. Let's say, I'm sure in all of our practice sessions, in all of our practice exercises, so far we would have come across terms like socialism and communism and Marxism. Well, there is a degree of overlap there. In the principles espoused. These are not identical ideas. What precisely is the difference between socialism and communism? that should be known by an average CAT aspirant. You are expected to know that difference, because if you're going for CAT, if you're going for a post-graduation degree entrance exam, the expectation is you would be familiar with basic terms that every graduate should ideally be aware of. So if there are topics or areas that you come across that you did not know previously, please list them out and go read 2 or 3 articles in a week about the new areas that you're coming across. It would be immensely helpful when the actual CAT rolls are. Okay. Then for VA section, for parajumbles, you would have had some theory class, some input there. There are certain rules or clues that everyone studies. Let's say a timeline based clue, or the pronoun based clue, or let's say general to specific, specific to general, different writing styles. Whatever rules you studied, go through it. Absolutely. When you're practicing, make sure you run through the checklist. Not for here, for every practice question you go through, make sure you run through the checklist. Pronoun based clues, everything I've seen. Time based clues, everything I've seen. Blah 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 blah. Whatever different rules you follow, go through it. Now, again, this checklist based work, once you've gone through 100 odd parajumble questions, after having checked the checklist, it will become a part of your general thought process. See, understand, most of the study is simply a matter of habit switching. Right now our habit switching is, let me find pairs straight away, and that works for people who are comfortable with language, who have solved a lot of parajumble questions. Somebody who is starting off, if you go for let me find pairs somewhere, very often what would happen is you would make pairs when no pairs exist, because you're not reading the entire sentence. What you're reading is one word here and one word here, and okay, a pair gets made. Don't do that. First, go through all the rules that you know. Solve stuff slowly. Do not solve it very, very quickly. Go through that checklist. Once you've gone through 100 odd certain questions, you would be comfortable that checklist checking would happen very, very naturally for you. During answer review, if there was a question where you missed out on a particular hint, and what I mean by hint is the certain clues and rules that you've gone through, record and assimilate learnings. Okay, there was clearly an order based issue. Additionally, this is my 2 cents, especially in VARC. There are 2 things with parajumbles. One, the certain rules and clues that we learn, they don't always work. Even let's say the chronological clue that you get, ideally it should be mentioned in order. That is not always true. In a lot of writing, we do jump forward and backward in writing. Secondly, parajumbles, this is more quant and a DILR person perspective on it. See, parajumbles are like collateral damage. What I mean by collateral damage is, unless you are extremely gifted at English, extremely gifted at language, it is highly unlikely for you to be achieving very high levels of accuracy in parajumble. So the effort allocation to parajumble is, let's say, even if you reach like a 60% benchmark, out of every 5 questions I solve, I get 3 right, 2 of them are wrong. Accept your fate and move on. Do not fall into the trap of no, I have to improve this to at least 90%. Most parajumbles that I do should be right. Because what people fail to realize when solving parajumbles is, parajumble based questions don't have negative marking. But marks are not the only thing you are trying to focus on during the exam. They don't have negative marking, but they do cost you in terms of the time that you invest on them. If any question in parajumble is taking you more than 90 seconds and you're not getting it right, that is an absolute waste of time. 90 seconds and whatever answer is coming to your head, mark and move on. That comes later. Okay, para summary questions, summary based questions. Make sure you treat them like mini RCs and engage in the I'm so sorry. Engage in the elimination technique to the fullest. Now for the elimination technique, 1 second. For the elimination technique, see, very often people make a mistake of misunderstanding selection as elimination. In fact, in our solving also, perhaps you would have seen, very often we come to the conclusion, it seems like B is the answer. So why is A wrong? Why is C wrong? Why is D wrong? We create reasons after identifying B is the answer. That is not elimination at all. So in elimination, when it comes to RCs or para summary, the process I follow and I recommend a lot of people to follow, because this is reasonable, this is logic based. You should be doing this. Option A versus option B. Between these two options, you will find flaws in option A, you will find flaws in option B. Between these two flaws, which flaw do you think is a minor flaw? Which flaw do you think is less objectionable? Whichever option has the minor flaw, whichever option has the less objectionable flaw, that survives. And it moves on to a death match with the next option. Now I do A versus C. Now in A versus C, let's say I believe A has the bigger flaw, C has the smaller flaw. Let's say A, go down the drain, you are absolutely useless. Now I will engage in C versus D. And now, if I believe C is better than D, C has lesser problems than D, then C survives. What this does is, it makes sure that I'm engaging in the elimination technique. Additionally, in VARC, very often people have this argumentation. If the official answer is given as C, but C has this problem, how can it be the answer? You never ever judge an option in isolation. You always judge it in reference to the other options that are present. So, if A has a huge problem, if B has a huge problem, and D has a huge problem, and C has a minor problem, then C is indeed the answer. CAT never, or in CAT RC passages also, you'll never find an option which is perfect. You have to find the least wrong option out of the four. And as long as you engage in the elimination technique, or at least in this elimination technique of this practice of doing elimination this way has worked wonderfully well for me when it comes to CAT RCs. I'm able to get, let's say, 14, 15 consistently right in CAT RCs, and even the ones that I get wrong, it is on account of me being lazy or careless. Back in the candidates, we had more RCs than 24 questions we had for RCs. So out of those 24 questions, if I got anything below 23 right, it was a disaster. So this elimination process of let me check every option. Very often it would also happen, you would find A to be wrong and you would find B to be wrong. Absolute nonsense is given in option A and B. Yet find the lesser evil out of the two. Whichever is the lesser evil, that survives, because then when you go to the third, when you compare it to the third option, when you compare it to the fourth option, when you compare it to the subsequent options, then you'll realize which one is the best available option out of the lot. Okay, please make sure for parasummary you treat them like mini RCs and engage in option elimination technique to the fullest. Do not this seems like it has maximum number of words mentioned. This seems like it is directly referencing one part of the passage, because while those techniques work in questions in which you know the answers beforehand, they don't really work in questions in which all the options are compromised. There is an error present in all the options. Okay, again, for odd one out, the initial note taking part of it, you will have your certain rules. The additional input is, for the initial practice, we do this. 3 seems like out of place, 3 doesn't seem like it should be part of the paragraph, so 3 is the answer. For the initial practice, don't reach your answer that way. Let's say if you believe 3 is the answer, for the remaining sentences 1, 2, 4 and 5, come up with an acceptable order of these 4 sentences as well. If you can come up with an acceptable order of these 4 sentences, then claiming 3 is the odd one out, it is a perfectly logical way to go. Otherwise, what would happen is very often, let's say 5, if you try to arrange them, 5 also seems odd, 3 also seems odd, you'll be able to identify, oh, I had a bias just because of some minuscule bias that I had, I ended up saying 3 was the odd one out. That should not work. Now, again, whenever you identify something wrong, very similar to parajumbles, answer review. If there is a particular hint that you missed out on, if there is a particular error, common error that you are making, record that in your notes and move on. See, remember I told you for VARC, notes making has limited application, because here notes making is more aligned with what you do in practice. It is not so much what you do in theory. Yes, there is theoretical portion. There are certain rules that you go through, or let's say in RCs, there are going to be certain types of RCs, genres and tones and styles and words. There is the initial part of it, but then that theory part of it can perhaps be covered in 1 week of, not even 1 week, let's say 3 to 4 days of dedicated study. And by dedicated study, I mean 2 hours per day. In 8 hours of theory of RC, you'll cover all the theory. But that theory will get into you and you would be able to solve RCs and you'll be able to solve VA questions when you practice a lot. So note taking in VARC is slightly limited. But more than that, note taking in DILR is even more limited. It's absolutely even more limited. Because there are two kinds of topics. One is data-centric topics and one is reasoning-based topics. For data-centric topics, learn the basic numeric manipulation techniques, stuff like comparing fractions, stuff like approximating values. Apart from that, anyone who has ever studied DILR at any place, you would have gotten this list of squares, reciprocals, cubes, and tables. You should be memorizing this, or you should be remembering this. Vivek, please do not unmute yourself out of turn. You should have this list of squares, reciprocals, cubes, tables, everything available for your reference at all times. Or at least you should be committing them to memory. My take on it is slightly different. Yes, by the time you appear for CAT, squares and reciprocals and cubes and tables, they should be embedded in your head. But if you try to memorize them, it is highly unlikely you'll be successful. What you should instead be doing is write it down on a sheet of paper, put it in front of the place where you usually study, put it down there, and then whenever you need to utilize it, refer to them. Anything that you go through several times over will get embedded in your head. It is very much like tables learning from childhood. For the first initial cycle, when people are learning tables, they are going through tables like this. 8 ones are 8, 8 twos are 16, 8 threes are 24, 8 fours are 32, 8 fives are 40, blah 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 blah. So even when somebody was asked 8 sevens are, they would go through the entire process and reach 56. But later on, when we started doing word problems, when we became a little more accustomed with language-based maths, then 8 into 7 became 56 naturally. It did not happen because you memorized the table, it happened because you started to put it into use. Or even the most mathematically challenged people amongst us, we would be very good at subtraction and addition because we've gone to shops and we bought stuff. Those of us who are not very good at division, we would have become very good at division when we started going out with friends and we had to split the bill. Those are the times that you become good at stuff. You don't become good at stuff because you've committed stuff to your memory. You become good at stuff because you've repeatedly done it. So learn the basic numeric manipulation techniques. And these basic numeric manipulation techniques in the initial phase are going to be more problematic and time consuming than your standard ways of doing stuff. But unless you give yourself the chance of learning these new ideas, you are never ever going to pick up pace. So in the initial phase, even if it is slow, dedicate yourself to learning those manipulation techniques and then get to the next part. Of course, squares, reciprocals, cubes, tables, whatever else, numbers based things. Stuff like everyone should be able to identify 1728, should be able to identify 2197 and 2744 and 3375 and 2744 and 2197. These are important numbers. These are important numbers that you should be aware of, because even when you're doing compound interest based things, this is 30% compounding. If you have 1000 rupees, at 30% compounding for 3 years, you'll get to this amount. At 40% compounding, you'll get to this amount. At 50% compounding, you'll get to this amount. These are very useful numbers for you to know. Okay. And then there are some reasoning topics. Now for reasoning topics, there are usually a standard set of instructions that you do. Not that the exhaustive list of instructions is covered within the standard set of instructions, but there are certain standard conditions that you get. So those standard conditions, those standard instructions, you need to go through them once. You need to familiarize yourself with them. Let's say when you're doing Venn diagrams, saying A and B and saying only A and B, these have two different implications. These have absolutely two different implications. Or saying the number of people who failed in a subject is 20 more than those who passed in a subject. This on the surface seems like, okay, this is some English language, but mathematically in set theory, this has huge utility. This is essentially telling you whatever your universal set is. Let's say if I tell you there are 400 kids in a class and the number of people who have passed in English is 40 more than those who have failed in English. This is essentially telling you people who have passed in English is 220 and people who have failed in English is 180. This information has been given to us because we have come across this number of people who passed in English, or part of a set and complement of a set, how that information gets transferred, standard instructions, standard conditions. Ideally, you need to familiarize yourself with them. Post that, there are going to be the learning points. One of the learning points that we talked of earlier was always start checking for cases at extreme ends. That ensures all the exhaustive number of cases are recorded for. Apart from that, there are different recording styles. In DILR, when you go through more and more sets, there are different recording styles that you come across. Somewhere a matrix is useful, somewhere a simple line is useful, somewhere creating a table with, let's say, a bifurcation in between them is useful. So what sort of recording style works in what sort of condition? While you will never be able to get to a point where you can definitely say, okay, this is the recording style that works. There are going to be instances where you'll see shades of something that you solved earlier, that will help you in being able to tackle new form of question that is thrown towards you. Given that DILR in CAT always gives us new kinds of questions and new sorts of basically thinking ideas, greater the number of recording styles at your disposal, different recording styles that you are comfortable with and are able to work with, the greater the likelihood of you being able to record the information in a manner that helps you process it further. Recording styles should keep on going in your notes assimilation, wherever you're doing your note collection thing, several times over. Okay, then it comes to note making for QA. QA, as previously stated, has the greatest application for note making. First thing is divide and conquer. Have separate notebooks, or at least have separate sections for numbers and arithmetic and algebra and geometry and modern math. And even within that, the portion where you have notes, the portion where you have inputs or learnings written, and the portion where you do practice, they should not be mixed. Because very often what would happen is you will flip over the pages thinking, okay, this is practice, but in between them there was some learning that gets missed out on. So your notes portion and your practice portion should be separated. Apart from that, whatever learnings you get, please try to write it down in English. To the extent possible. Your ability to comprehend the questions, your ability to write stuff down in English is going to be of tremendous help when it comes to solving questions in QA. Because, like previously stated, the challenge in QA is not the maths of it. The challenge in QA is understanding the question. Most of us are good at maths. We are not good at understanding the question. So it is better to be verbose than laconic. अंग्रेजी के दो शब्द मार दिए हमने. So write it in more words. It is better if you write it in more words. Do not try to shorten it, because if you try to shorten it, perhaps you'll miss out on something that you don't deem important right now, but later on, that is the usual mistake you make. Please reduce the, let's say, stuff like, very small stuff like percentage increase, percentage increase by, percentage increase to, change. These small little terms, while they are very similar in nature, they have drastic impact when you get the meaning of them wrong. Please write concept summaries in English. Even when you write formulae, I've written formulas, should be formulae. Even when you write formulae, write the constraints. Without constraints, these wouldn't work. Okay. Next, example problems. Of course, in your notes, include example problems. Whatever gets done in your class or wherever you're studying from, whatever example problems are there, please make sure you include example problems. Hopefully the place where you're studying from gives you example problems of simple questions also, and also relatively more difficult questions, because you get an idea of, let's say when you're doing time and work, If you only know the LCM based method when it comes to, let's say, A does it in 10 days and B does it in 15 days, and so together they'll do it in 6 days, then the entire point of the LCM method is waste, because 10 and 15 full number of days given for two people, you could anyway directly get to the answer. The LCM method does not really help you there. Where LCM method can potentially help you is, let's say A does a work in 45 days, B does a work in 60 days, and C destroys that work in 90 days. Now, if they do the work in such a manner, A does it on first day, B does it on second day, and C does it on third day, in how many days will the work get done? Anyone who is interested in solving it later on, the answer will be 106, 1 by 3 days. How the LCM based processing can help you get to the answer there, that is useful. So hopefully wherever you are, you're getting all sorts of difficulty level of problems done. Of course, not right at the beginning. At the beginning you start with basic, then moderate, then high level stuff. But whatever example questions come your way, that should be there. Use visual aids, make diagrams, make beautiful graphs, charts, whatever you can, because diagrammatic information stays with us for a longer amount of time. It also makes it appealing. Otherwise, going through simple words is kind of drab. If you can include any sort of diagram, if you can include, let's say, even when you're doing replacement, if you have something like this, 10 liters out, and then you have 10 liters of 20% milk coming in, and this originally was, let's say, 150 liters of mixture, and then this process happens 3 times. If you can make a diagram like this, it is far more appealing than simply reading the entire text. Use visual aids, it is more engaging, the material is more engaging. Okay, now talking of repositories. What I mean by repository is a collection of good or tricky questions you come across. In every class or every topic that you would have come across, there are going to be certain questions that were just beyond your reach. Otherwise, that class is not so good. But there are questions that are just beyond your reach, or that questions that teach you something. Ideally, those questions, those issues that you should be collecting them. You should be collecting them and keeping it in some Google Doc or some online resource. Don't do it on a notebook. Don't do it in a hard copy. Do it in some online space. And what you should be doing is going back to that repository every 2 to 3 weeks and simply look at the question. Usually, in your initial solving, in your initial working, there would be something that you would have missed out on. So when you're looking at that question again 2 weeks or 3 weeks hence, if you're able to quickly identify, okay, this is what I should have done, this is what the working should have been, then your repository building is useful. Otherwise, if you're simply collecting questions and you never go back to them, it is useless. With that repository building, what would also happen is you'll update your notes. If there was some concept that you had read and you had written down and your notes were not complete, or some parameter was missing there, you can update your notes. I'll show you a repository of a former student. This student ended up with something in CAT, 99 point something in CAT. So I'll show you. Can you see this repository, people? QA repository. This is a former student of mine. Can you see this repository, people? Can you see this Google Doc?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this was Ayush Bhatia. He is currently at MDA. So he had made one repository of sorts. So see, with passage of time, if you start recognizing those questions, if you start identifying, okay, this idea I'm not missing out on, this idea I'm able to quickly identify and move on from, then that question also gets eliminated from the repository. It doesn't stay there forever. But then when you start taking mocks, when you start taking tests, then that repository keeps on getting built. So this is a repository. See, first he put down the question. Now when he's coming back to this for review, he puts it down, he sees, he solves. Now this is his own learning. He writes down his own learning, add ratio and check if it is prime, blah blah blah. For most of us, for some of us, I'm guessing, This would not be that difficult a question. This is very simple. But then he's written down his own learning, then he's written down how the solving could have been done, and he's moved on. Next question. Some expression, something. For those of us who are not very familiar or comfortable with Hindi, you may not understand. But question in its pristine form, then his own learning from the question, and then what the solving would look like. Similarly, question, the trigger should have been keeping values to get L minus M plus N, which works at minus 1. Here won't work as 0, equal to 0, so only roots work. I don't know what is written. I absolutely don't understand what is written. My bigger idea here is the fact that he should be able to understand what is written. And then look at this. If you can see this number here, this repository keeps on getting built. By the time he appears for cat, he had managed to, this is 2022 cycle, so simcat and whatever other mocks and tests and every sort of thing that he learned, 2IM, Rajesh sir's videos, and whatever else he could get his hands on, everything is present here. Now for him, let's say if he wants to do a mental exercise of the things that I've learned in this year, the things that escaped me, small little errors that I made, am I still making those errors? He can happily come back to this document and work. And hopefully you'll realize same ethos, same logic would work for the DILR repository as well. Now some test discussion, he's written down the question. Whenever there is a 5-setter Venn diagram involved, always there is a catch. Look for information such as point 1 which tells that M is inside only. So far in CAT, in any mocks, we have never got a 5-setter Venn diagram creation requirement. So it is always, whenever you have a 5-setter Venn diagram, something will be included within something. So you don't have to worry about creating a 5-setter Venn diagram. Then this is a standard question. In this set, key was to record very aptly, and logic of checking cases would be from the highest and next number, which is what we talked of. Extreme case checking. Then there was some set, again case checking was done here. Then some simcat based. इस टाइप के क्वेश्चंस में सिंस मैचेस का नंबर मैटर करता है, सो रिकॉर्डिंग स्टाइल शुड बी 1 to 16 नंबर्स लिखो मैचेस के लिए, एंड आगे जो कंडीशन दी है उसके अकॉर्डिंग रैंकिंग लिखो. सिर्फ डोंट राइट कंट्री, वेस्ट ऑफ टाइम. समथिंग वेरी वेरी नेम, डोंट राइट नेम ऑफ कंट्री, इट इज़ अ वेस्ट ऑफ टाइम, बट इफ इट हेल्प्स हिम, इट हेल्प्स हिम. ओके, इसको बस एज अ टेबल बना लो, बेस्ट रहेगा ताकि मैच नंबर ट्रैक कर सको. इसमें मैच नंबर ट्रैक करना टफ है इसलिए. ओके, then some set, then some set, then some set. All the sets that he found useful, all the sets that he found there are things that I can learn from these, he's kept on, and hopefully you would see for all the sets he always follows it up with some sort of learning. He also follows it up with some sort of learning. Just collecting the question is not enough. It has to be followed up with what you learned from it, what error you made. Otherwise, it will have no meaning for you. And also the meaning that you write or the learning that you write, you should be able to understand this, because very often I am unable to understand what is written. Reading that machine 2 is greater than 1, 5 is greater than 4. If the sums differ by 5, this means each value is -1 of m of machine 2, and similarly 4 for it is -1 of 5. I have absolutely no clue what this means, but somebody who's written it down, he would have a better understanding of what this means, what this goes in. With that said, hopefully you understand what repository is. Collection of good questions that give you learning. What learning they give you, you should write it down. You should keep going back to that repository every 2 to 3 weeks, and closer to CAT, perhaps every 2 to 3 days. Look at those questions. If those learnings, see, logic of this is, if this is all the knowledge, assuming this is all the knowledge you need for CAT, right now, a lot of us would be at this point, and this is the suspect zone. This is the uncertain zone, stuff that we don't know. If you keep on identifying and assimilating what errors you make, your known zone will expand, and the kind of errors that you can make will reduce tremendously. And that is the entire objective behind the repository building work. As long as you keep reducing the scope of your errors, That is the best way of proceeding forward. Okay, now this final question, notes along with class or later. And this is, I will be very, very clear. This is something that I am talking more in reference to my classes. In my classes, stuff that gets covered is not absolute. In the first class of some topic, it is basic. In the second class, it builds upon that. In the third class, it builds upon that. In the fourth class, it builds upon that. Because of that, students are very regular to classes, so you can't be certain. Sometimes people end up joining from the third class or the fourth class. So my recommendation to them is, in case you are able to make notes and also understand what is being talked of in class, go ahead, do that. But in 2 to 3 iterations, you would be able to identify what sort of workload you can manage. If it is getting overwhelming for you, during the course of the class, only pay attention in class. Whatever the teacher is saying, whatever solving is happening, focus on your practice work. After the class, watch the recording at 1.5 or 2x, whatever speed you can manage it at, and make notes at that time. Basically reinforce whatever was covered in the class. Do not do both those things. Do not do both those things simultaneously, just because that is how we have studied so far in our life. Whatever we have studied and however we have studied so far in our life in school and college, that study is not identical to that, because interpretation and understanding of stuff is far more important now. Rote learning wouldn't work. And in case you find that task overwhelming, understand you are not operating at the same rate or at same level as other people. So don't take it up as, oh, I am so weak. Take it up as, okay, I have to do this extra work to overcome this lack, and it is very, very overcomable. I don't know if such a word exists, but it is very, very overcomable. So in case doing solving stuff in class and making notes, both those things don't happen for you simultaneously, the answer is not unique. You should make notes and you should not make notes. It is more like whatever category you fall into, accordingly adjust, accordingly find the ways that work for you. And that is all from my side. If you have any questions, now is the time to ask. We can go back to the earlier pages of the presentation if you have any specific question from there. Which topics should we consider to expand our horizon as average CAT aspirants, as it differs from person to person? But so, Fish, what I mean by that is, you would have come across certain RCs. Let's say you've read something about how Marxism and utilitarianism has, let's say, overlapping principles that they work with. You, while reading that RC, you read, that is done. After that, you go back and you search about Marxism, you search about utilitarianism. If you start doing an exhaustive list of all the topics that you should be knowing of, that list will be never ending. But at least about the things that we are going through and simple topics that you should be aware of, which is, let's say, forms of governance, or let's say stuff like how economy functions, how businesses run, how, let's say, marketing or finance operations of an organization impacts its processes. These are basic ideas that everyone is expected to know, at least in the language form. So there is no exhaustive list that you should know all of this. Let's say if you are absolutely clueless about financial terms, balance sheet and income statement you should know. But what is, let's say, tax shield at the time of CAPM model of asset pricing model, वो सब नहीं जानना. But balance sheet, what balance sheet represents, what income statement represents, which is a stock concept, which is a flow concept, this one is expected to know at the time of reading RCs, or even when you get for the interview stage. So the best indicator of where you should be expanding your horizon would come from you solving RCs. Whenever you feel like, oh, this is a new topic, this, let's say, cloning, Dolly the sheep, I don't know, for us, 1996, 97, around that time, Dolly the sheep was all the rage. It was the viral moment of the earlier century. So cloning, our generation has more interest in it. Our generation has sort of lived through that experience. The ethical dilemma, the ethical dimensions of it, we have gone through it several times. So I don't know if cloning as a topic, the people in your generation would have read as much. But if you went ahead and searched, you will find articles. And whenever you Google such articles, don't say A to Z of cloning. The ethical dimensions of cloning, basic articles, basic understanding, starting point. Give these keywords, they'll give you the starting point, and that's it. You should be familiar, not an expert on these issues, simply familiar. Okay. Any other question, people? Any other question? Kirutika, I can't hear you if you're saying something. I can see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you.
So can you hear me now?
Yes, go on.
Yes, sir. So I recently graduated with a degree in sociology. I graduated in April 2024, and I'm taking up CAT in November 2024. So I was just wondering if this gap of 5 to 6 months in my resume would actually impact my chances of getting into a very good B school. As far as this, I think I'm fairly good enough with all the sections, and I'm working continuously to improve. And I think my scores will be good enough. What I'm worried about is the gap year. And my profile is I've got 97% in my 10th, 94.8% in my 12th, and a first class with distinction in my UG.
First class with distinction means
Uh,
75 plus in UG.
yes, 7.5 GPA.
7.5 GPA does not translate to 75%.
Yeah, percentage, I think.
I don't know if see distinction is 75% plus. I am old school. I know distinction is
Yeah, yeah,
75% plus.
yeah.
7.5 GPA doesn't make it. Anyway, understand. One wonderful thing. No B school is ever going to reject you out of hand because you have a gap on your profile.
Okay.
Especially the most acceptable gap that exists right now is right after graduation. If you have like say 5-6 month gap as you have, that is fine. But yes, this would not be looked upon kindly. And because of this, what would happen is they would test you on other areas. So let's say the biggest question that you will face in your interviews is
Okay.
you've done excellently well in your academic life so far. You did sociology in your graduation. When did you really decide you want to do management? Now the question is not when did you decide. The question is whenever you decided you wanted to switch to management, ever since then, in order to get familiar with this world, in order to get acquainted with this world, have you done something, or is this something that you are taking up simply because everyone says MBA is the path to take, so we are taking it up, or there is some inherent interest that you have, or some experience or exposure that you had? I don't want the answer to this question. I'm
Okay.
just saying, if you can convince them, if you can simply convince them that sociology to management switch makes sense for you, it is something that you're genuinely invested in, then they wouldn't care about the 5-6 month gap.
Okay.
If you're unable to convince them on the sociology to this 5-6 month gap will be an additional compounding factor which will make your answers or your profile unappealing to them. But if you convince them on the sociology to management switch, they would be more than happy to uh, ignore the fact that you have not been working for 5 to 6 months. It's not like, see, in CAT interviews, you don't get rejected on one thing, especially not gaps in profile. There are people with 4 years gap in profile with no reasonable excuse apart from I was into skating. There was a kid in 2020, CAT 2020 cycle. He somehow got 99.82 percentile, very poor academic got prior to that. He got a call from Calcutta. In the interview room, they asked him, why haven't you been working for 4 years? After graduation, he had 4 year gap. Why haven't you been working? And he followed it up with, sir, I was very much into skating and I thought I'll make a career in skating. But then I got into an accident. My clavicle was broken. It took me a year to recover from that. Then I thought I'll do some insurance. I appeared for 2-3 actuaries papers. I failed in them. Then I thought, okay, I'll do an MBA. I took CAT. Luckily, I'm in front of you. This is what he said. This is honestly what he said. And he got in. As long as you're honest, and you tell them you've not been sitting around and whiling away time, they don't mind the gap. The problem is when people try to hide the gap with fanciful things like I was working in an NGO in a capacity to expand their operations at a pan-India level, and they know, okay, you're fibbing. Because you're fibbing, everything else that you're saying is also under cloud, and I'm not willing to trust whatever you're giving to me. So
Okay.
as long as you're honest and you mention them why your sociology to management switch works for you,
Okay.
they would not have a problem with your 5 to 6 month gap.
Okay, just one more thing. My actual reason that I'm not working is that I've been suffering from asthma for the last 5 years, and I really needed this gap to take care of my health. I'm currently working towards improving my health and it is actually improving very well. So would
Yeah.
that be enough of a justification, you know? Because
Acha, acha, acha. I'll tell you this wonderful thing, and this is sort of sad or good. Wherever you're going for an interview,
yeah.
do not tell them about your medical condition,
Okay, sir.
because see, the first year of B schools is usually very taxing, and these B schools are very afraid of any sort of trouble that might come their way because of the taxing lifestyle that the first year students have to face. So
Okay.
people who have, let's say, spinal cord issues, people who have vertebrae issues, people who have asthma issues,
Hmm.
and let's say small little asthma attacks is fine, but if you have asthma issues that require you to take time off, if it is that serious, they would need for you to be, let's say, hale and hearty and functioning at a high level for at least 1 to 2 years before they let you come to a B school. So the advice would be, in the interview room, don't mention the asthma issue. Simply say, no, given that I wanted to make a switch from sociology to management and I wanted to give it my best shot in the first go itself, I dedicated myself entirely to cat. Do not talk of asthma issues.
Yes, yes.
Do not talk of asthma issues. It's not like they would say, oh, you had asthma, I will reject you.
Okay,
But
okay.
then I understand their perspective also. It is not like a school, and you are on their campus for the entire duration. The degree of liability that they are willing to take on would be limited. So they wouldn't want somebody whose health is compromised, and they know in the first. I hope you know, in the first year of college, or at least in MBA, it is a very sad life. You have to
Yes.
stay up till long and you have to do a lot of work. So it they wouldn't want to take on somebody whose health is compromised unless you have an excellent stellar profile, and they know that missing out on you would be a huge loss for them. So if you can get away with not mentioning the asthma issue, it would be better for you. But then again, ठीक है.
Okay.
I hope you understand the perspective there. I'm
Yes.
not saying lie. I'm not
Okay.
saying lie, but I'm saying sometimes there are certain parts that you need to withhold.
Okay. Yes, sir. That's understandable. Thank you so much.
Any other questions, people? Any other questions? None? Okay. So, Divine, let's end it there.
Yes,
Thank you very
sir.
much.
Yes.
Thank you very much, people.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir.
How do I give you the host? I'm making you the host again now.
No, you can end the call. No problem, sir.
Okay. Bye bye.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Bye bye.
Okay.